LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, in 1 year, 3 hours and 56 minutes, we will be leaving the European Union. That is when Article 50 runs out and we leave the treaties that started off with the Treaty of Rome all the way back in the early 1970s and went on and included things like the Lisbon Treaty. We are leaving the European Union 1 year from today, but there are still some who think Brexit can be stopped. And speaking this morning at a conference in London was one Tony Blair, and he thinks a second referendum is perfectly rational.
I think the Conservatives have got to understand that if they drive through this Brexit deal, that is going to be the gateway to a Corbyn government, because in my view, Brexit will then be 100% owned by the Tories. I don't believe that Labour will vote for the Tory deal on Brexit, and it will allow Labour to say, well, we'd have got you a better deal and these guys didn't get the right deal and so on. And by the time you get to 2022, you'll be out of the European Union. People will then, I've got a feeling the 17 million who voted to leave are going to be short on gratitude, and the 60 million who voted to remain are going to be long on memory.
And he went on to say that he wanted Parliament to vote down the deal to force a second referendum, but he also said that if that does not happen, and if we don't get a second referendum, he will stop talking about Europe. Now, that's kind of what I call an incentive. That's my view. I spoke at that conference later on in the afternoon, and I've been around TV studios. I sat this morning on Good Morning Britain debating with Lord Adonis. And I was one of those people who, 4 to 5 months ago, I was really, really concerned. I could see a never-ending string of Remainers going to Brussels, meeting Monsieur Barnier. I could see through the news feeds every week that the Remain campaign were highly organised. They even started their own newspaper last year. And I was really getting fearful that a second referendum may well be forced upon us. But today, sitting next to Lord Adonis and appearing on that stage after Tony Blair, I began to look at people calling for a second referendum, and I began to think, do you know what? They're actually not only sounding repetitive, they're looking a little bit silly. And much of this backed up in a survey, a poll done by Comres for the Daily Express, published today. 68% of Britons think that those who voted against quitting the EU should respect the majority view. Remarkably, 38% in this poll who voted Remain in the 2016 referendum now agree the Leave vote should be respected. And 68% support the government getting on and delivering Brexit. So we're nearing 70% of the country that think we should get on and deliver Brexit. And I think in a sense, the country is actually coming together. That is a pretty big majority in any democracy. But there are still voices out there. There's Tony Blair, there's Nick Clegg, there's Sir Vince Cable, there's Ben Bradshaw, there's Ken Clarke. There are many who still think Brexit can be stopped. So tell me, what do you think? Does anyone out there still think that a second vote on this is possible? And if you think, no, Nigel, you've got this right, you bang on, absolutely, we're leaving, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or if you think, hold your horses, there's a lot could happen over the course of the next year, then text to 84850. And maybe you think that Mr. Blair is a man that we should respect and listen to, in which case, of course, you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Let's get straight to the callers and go to Kevin, who's calling from Oxford. Kevin, is a second referendum still possible?
Hi there, Nigel. No, I don't think it is. I think we're past the finish line. We're definitely going to leave, and I'm very happy about that. And Tony Blair constantly trying to get a second referendum. It makes me remember my father, who voted against us going into Europe in the first place.
Yeah.
And all his life, so another 40-odd years, he just had to accept that the country had gone the other way, and that's what he did. So I think, when the other side, my side, didn't do so well, there were no great calls for another referendum. It was just had to be accepted.
Yeah, I mean, the arguments, of course, they use are that the Leave campaign lied, that the Leave campaign cheated. The arguments they use are that the voters didn't understand what they were voting for, which, Kevin, actually, I think, probably makes those that think we should just get on with it and leave even bigger, because people hate being condescended to by politicians in that way. They're the arguments that they go with. Kevin, I think the most significant thing that's happened on Brexit in the last few weeks, and I have talked about it before on this show, and I don't apologise for saying it again, is when Jeremy Corbyn sacked Owen Smith, because Owen Smith repeated his call for a second referendum. Shortly thereafter, Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, came very much into line with Corbyn to say, there's not going to be a second vote, we are leaving. And I think, Kevin, that Labour realise there are about 4.5 million people who voted Brexit and then voted for Corbyn in the election, and they know to attempt to delay Article 50 or to force a referendum, I think they know, Kevin, it would be electoral suicide for them.
No, I 100% agree. I mean, I'm fully on your side, so I'm a bit of a fanboy. I think you're a hero. Wow. I fully agree.
That's the first nice thing, Kevin. That's the first nice thing anyone said to me today, so thank you.
That's okay. But Corbyn, I think, has always been not a fan of Europe, so I think it's no real surprise. I think he's kind of thought that he'd have to fall in with the Labour moderates, as they're called, but I think Corbyn is pretty definitely, in a way, on my side, even though politically I don't agree with him very much.
Well, I think on this he has been. He's a lifelong Bennite. I think we're leaving. However, Kevin, the terms on which we're leaving, I'm less than happy with. And just to sort of share this with you, that this poll also shows that 44% of Brits questioned in this poll thought the government's handling of the negotiations with Brussels had been a total shambles, and that a further 28% said the performance had been quite poor but appears to be improving. So we're not very happy, any of us, from either side, with the way Brexit's being done. But I think the fact that it is going to happen, and this big historical moment of national liberation is going to occur next year. That's my view.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I went travelling, and people said in a negotiation for when buying something in a market, always sort of state that you want a third of what you think it really costs, and then see what they say, and then sort of strike a deal in the middle
and settle.
Whereas we seem to be letting Europeans come in with the first ridiculous offer. And then striking a deal near.
Yeah, and they say to me, Kevin, Nigel, don't moan. What are you moaning about? 40 billion? They wanted 70 billion. Yeah, we've got a great deal. It's a rotten deal. Kevin, I thank you very much indeed for your call. On text I get, thank God Tony Blair keeps talking. It makes more and more people wanting Brexit, says Lee. I really believe that there will be a second referendum, and I tell you what, I'm going to vote again. Since the last referendum, I've changed my mind. I voted Remain, but I would now vote Leave second time round. I don't want to leave the EU, but just like they say, a lot of people had voted Leave to protest against the government, and I will vote Leave to protest for our democracy, because having a second referendum is not democratic. So Jimmy in Colchester is one of those people who, if Blair succeeded in forcing to make us vote again, would stick two fingers up to the entire establishment for daring to do it. And I think there are a lot of very bloody-minded people out there who might behave in the same way. I wonder what Jeff in Redditch makes of all of this. Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening, Nigel. Congratulations on all your efforts on our behalf.
Well, that's kind of you, Jeff. Years ago, I mean, Jeff, tell me, do you now think in your head we're leaving a year from now?
We better leave. I haven't got a problem with leaving. I just think at the end of the day, the difficulty we've got is a bunch of people who, for the first time ever, want a second vote on things. I'm not aware of anything. We didn't go to the Second World War and have a second vote on whether we're going. We went and did it. We didn't have a second vote to go in the common market. We went and did it. I didn't particularly favour these things, but we did it and we got on with it. And then I'll come back to an old boss I used to have, and he used to say to me, your big problem is when you want to change anything, it's like swimming through a sea of vomit. And I look at the House of Commons, and it's just, I look at the House of Commons, and that's what it's like when I look at them. And he used to say to me, it's not the inputs that count, it's the outputs that count. And you think of all the difficulty that Mrs May's had in trying to get through this sea of vomit, and she's actually making some progress. And he always used to say to me again, you can either think positively about things or you can think negatively about things. When people tell you they've got problems, they're just imprisoned solutions.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, I'm with you on that. This is too difficult, that's too difficult. It's going to be really difficult to sort out, the border. And actually, if you've got the will to do things, Jeff, you just get on and do them, don't you?
Of course you do. You come back down to, do you want to do it or don't you want to do it?
Yeah.
And I listened to that programme this morning, the political programme this morning. I saw you on there, and I saw the Labour politician there. And every single time, there's got to be a negative thrown in. You're getting your pension paid free, aren't you?
Yeah. They're questioning. My pension gets questioned. The other 23,000 are fine. It's just me, Jeff. I am the evil enemy. Jeff, I thank you very much for your call. So come on. So far, callers agreeing with me that actually we are going to leave in a year's time and that a second referendum is now looking somewhat of a distant prospect. But tell me I've got it wrong. Please do. 0345 60 60 973. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:15. Tony Blair pitches again for a second referendum on our EU membership, but I think it's all beginning to look a bit silly. I think it's beginning to look like a done deal. I think we are leaving on the 29th of March 2019, albeit on terms that I don't like very much. Much of the big decisions have been kicked down the road in terms of what we're going to do about trade and fishing and all the rest of it. But I do think we're leaving those treaties. I do think a big historic day is coming. I can't see the prospect of a second referendum. That's how I feel. But hey, this is LBC. Doesn't matter what I think. It matters what you think. What does Tony from Woodford think? Good evening, Tony.
Good evening, Nigel. I think it's a mistake what's going on. I think there should be a second vote. The public were misled on both sides, Nigel, okay? And I think it's much better to be a part of Europe, especially the way Russia is at the moment, and we renegotiate better terms for this country, and you should be the head negotiator to do it. You know these people very, very well.
Well, Tony...
Surely you wouldn't object to that.
Tony, first things first, would you agree that probably the voters are misled at every single general election?
Absolutely, yes.
So being misled, or accusations of being misled, are nothing new, and I don't think on those grounds we could even contemplate rerunning a referendum. As for a different deal, Tony, let me tell you this. Had the European Union treated the United Kingdom with a modicum of respect, David Cameron would have come back from Brussels and said, look, they've given us this. We will be able to control our borders. We will be able, they're going to give us some powers back in a variety of areas. Tony, if Cameron had come back with that, we would have voted to stay. But the European Union don't operate like that, Tony. They are building a United States of Europe. They want everybody to have the same currency. They want a European army. Tony, they're not going to give us anything.
Yeah, but I believe that Cameron was weak, and that's the plan, isn't it? That is the plan in this global world, that we are a part, if not leading, the United States of Europe. What's wrong with that, Nigel? If we negotiate...
Well, Tony, I tell you what's wrong with that, Tony. Not only do a massive majority of people in this country not want to be part of the United States of Europe, but a big majority of people in France don't want to be part of it, and Germany and Italy. It's not something the peoples of Europe want, Tony. Now, what I do think they want is a Europe of cooperation and trade, but they don't want the Europe of Juncker and Barnier.
Okay, but why was the public so misled with lie after lie after lie from both sides? People voted because they believed certain things which turned out to be utter rubbish.
Tony, you could argue we'd never have voted yes in 75 if they hadn't told us it was just about trade and not politics. So, as I say, you can argue this at every election, but I mean, let me ask you a separate question. I know what you want to happen. Let me ask you a slightly separate question. Do you think that there is still a prospect of that vote being rerun?
Absolutely, because the establishment never ever thought that the public would vote to leave, and they're doing everything. They're wheeling Blair back out to talk rubbish. Okay, so
he's on your side, Tony.
let's have another vote.
Tony
What's wrong
Blair's
with that,
on your side and you're criticising him.
No, I don't. I'd never liked Blair. I'd never ever liked Blair.
Okay. Tony, I think you're wrong, but I do get your passion, and that's a very, very good thing. Thank you. Nigel, please, we should have a second vote, I get on text. By December, a simple one. Accept the deal on the table at that stage, or leave with no deal and no financial commitments in March 19 without transition, says Wayne, optimistically in Cornwall. Wayne, I tell you what, that is something Parliament are not going to give us. It isn't going to happen. And maybe one of the reasons that May has made as many concessions as she has is she's really worried about that final parliamentary vote. Although my view is if she took a much tougher stand, she'd take the country with her. And if you take the country with you, probably much easier to take Parliament with you too. Anne says Tony Blair has not given up on his dream of becoming President of the United States of Europe. That is why he is so desperate for us to remain. It's such a fundamental and potentially irreversible decision to leave the EU, and with just a few percentage points in it, surely we must have an endorsement of the eventual deal. I think it would be quite dangerous for the stability of society if things go south and there wasn't a ratification of any deal, says Nick in Sevenoaks. Well, Nick, actually, I think what might be even more dangerous is forcing people to vote again. I wonder whether they'd ever trust anything anybody ever said to them again in the future. Because it couldn't have been clearer, could it? It couldn't have been clearer from Cameron and Blair and Clegg. If you vote to leave, this is it. We are leaving. It will be a disaster. Your house prices will collapse. Your pension funds will collapse. They told us this was it. It was our decision. And to ask us to do it again, boy, people would be angry. Danny is calling from Epsom. Danny, hi.
Hi, Nigel. I've got to say, the one thing where I'd like to see Tony Blair is on a boat going through Traitor's Gate into the Tower. Because
it's a bit strong, Danny, isn't it?
No, not really, because I think one of the biggest contributing factors to Brexit, I think he's the architect of it. I think his 13-year tenure, when he put a social experiment together where him, Wallace and Brown purposefully filled the UK full of people from outside the EU. They did cap new EU member states. They did it on purpose. That I quote, let's rub the noses of the right in it.
I know. So Danny, really, given that I can tell you're a fervent Brexiteer as I am, maybe what we really ought to do is have a statue to Tony Blair on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, because without him, Brexit would never have happened.
Well, exactly. I mean, I look at the town and city that I grew up in, and it's unrecognisable, and it's down to him. And if it wasn't for him, it would have never happened, Nigel. And I know full well that you have always said that yourself.
Yep, no, I think Blair was a big part of this. I also have to put a word in for Angela Merkel, because I think not only did her decision to open the doors unconditionally to very large numbers of people, not only did that help Brexit, but it's also now leading to disintegration of the European project, where premiers in Hungary and Poland are standing up to the European Commission saying, no, we will not take your migrant quotas, we will not pay for Mrs Merkel's error.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, I looked at the news before Brexit, and I looked at basically 90% or more fighting-age men from the third world coming into my continent. And I was thinking, well, wouldn't they have the right to come here? And it frightened me. It was one of the. It frightened me. I've got 3 kids. I thought, I don't want that. I mean, when you look at what we have to deal with in today's society, I look at my granddad or my dad's generation. They never even heard of female genital mutilation, honour killings, suicide bombing. It was completely unheard of, and now it's an everyday occurrence. And we've imported that in less than 1 month.
I have to say, Danny, it's a separate issue to tonight's debate. But the fact there has not yet in this country been a single conviction for female genital mutilation is absolutely shaming, given the numbers of people we're told are involved. Danny, quick question for you before I move on. Yep. Do you agree with me that the attempt to push for a second referendum is now really falling into the sand?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had a second referendum in this country, the country would fall apart. Everything about our democratic institutions, people would lose faith.
Trust,
and trust and faith in any government. And it's already pretty low. It's already pretty low.
No, Danny, I agree with you. Danny, I've got to move on. I thank you. Terry from Worthing thinks the intelligent British voters would smell a giant Blair-bred rat and vote leave by a bigger margin. Terry, I think if they did this to us, we'd become more bloody-minded than we've ever been, and I rather agree with you. Will is calling from Hatfield. Hi, Will.
Hello, Nigel.
So, Blair is pushing really hard today, you know, and actually, he wasn't really speaking to the public. He was speaking to the Labour Party and the Tory rebels. He was speaking to Parliament. He wants to get a parliamentary rebellion against whatever deal Mrs May comes back with.
Well, yeah, it's very presumptuous that we are going to get a bad deal, because at the moment, all we seem to be seeing in the media is a huge part of Project Fear and just the negative narrative that Brexit's going terribly and that it's not going to work out well for us. And part of that included with, at the moment, Russia, for example. The huge thing going on with Russia, obviously won't go into the details of it, but if we leave the European Union, for example, they're trying to use that as a bit of pressure to get the vote to go ahead for the referendum again. It's just all a bit fishy, really.
Well, one thing for certain, if there was a real momentum for a second referendum in Britain, why would the European Union give us any deal of any kind at all?
Well, exactly.
You know, we would lose any. I mean, to have strength in a negotiation, you have to threaten to walk away from the table, and I'm afraid Mrs May doesn't ever show that side. But hey, you know what, Will? If on the continent they thought a second referendum was really on the cards, they'd give us nothing.
Well, yeah. For example, like with May being in charge, she was a Remainer, wasn't she? I was right in thinking that. Yeah.
Yes, she was.
Yeah. What we have got to worry about is it, because everything seems to be going so bad, is it possible that we are being far more lax in the approach to the deals at the moment, that we're purposely trying to get the referendum again?
No, I don't think so. Whatever my disappointment in the Prime Minister about her lack of conviction and belief in Brexit, however I feel about those things, the idea that she's deliberately trying to louse the whole deal up so we get a second referendum, I don't buy into that at all. I thank you. More on this in a moment, but for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It is now 7:30, and I think Tony Blair's whistling in the wind. I think these demands for a second referendum are now beginning to look somewhat silly. It really isn't going to happen, folks, is it? Well, if you disagree with that, call 0345 6060 973. But before that, very, very interesting. Trump, the president, has been pretty critical of many of the large multinational corporations over time. But he's really come out strong this week. I mean, here's a tweet from Trump. I have stated my concerns with Amazon long before the election. Unlike others, they pay little or no taxes to state and local governments, use our postal system as their delivery boy, causing tremendous loss to the US, and are putting many thousands of retailers out of business. So it looks like Trump is beginning to really mean business when it comes to these big companies, the amounts of tax they're paying. The share price of Amazon from a month ago is now down by 18%. Yeah, sure, the market's down a bit, but this does show the power of the president. But hey, this is interesting because Jeremy Corbyn today tweeted, yesterday, Google announced its UK tax bill will be just £50 million despite nearly $6 billion of sales in our country. As our public services are being slashed, the Tories are letting an elite few get away with not paying their fair share. We're not broke, we're being robbed. Well, frankly, Jeremy, that could almost have been sent, in many ways, in a US context, by Donald J. Trump. And I predict what you will see, because we've heard some similar noises from Canada over the last couple of days, I think Western governments are going to get together and are going to try to start to make these vast companies who make huge profits pay a little bit more tax. And you know what? I don't think that'd be a bad thing. And the other story that really caught my eye today. Now, you'll know from about 10 days ago, the big Guardian exclusive, Cambridge Analytica, the data firm, had done something simply monstrous. They'd managed, using Facebook, to gain the records of up to 50 million people. And it was painted out as if these people were part of the Wild West, as if they were really bad guys that had done something deeply, deeply illegal. And boy, haven't the Guardian made hay over it. They've questioned the legitimacy of the referendum using these tactics. Well, how about this? The Guardian Facebook app privacy policy And if you read it, you find, if you click onto the Guardian app, you are giving them your Facebook details and that of your friends as well. So the Guardian are doing exactly the same thing that Cambridge Analytica are doing. In fact, everybody in this industry is doing it. Now, you could argue for the law to change, but isn't it interesting? Because the Guardian claim 3.2 million regular users of this app. Now, working on the same numbers by which we got to Cambridge Analytica, this could mean that the Guardian have accessed the private Facebook data of hundreds of millions of people across the UK, the US and the rest of the world. And they qualify for my Hypocrite of the Week prize. Boy, they really do. Back to a second referendum. I'm going to go to Robert, who lives in Norwich, to ask him, am I right in thinking, Robert, that those demands for a second referendum are falling away?
Well, I certainly hope so, Nigel. What I'd also say, something that no one really talks about, is if we have what Vince Cable called the exit from Brexit,
yes,
and I've written to him about this, then I believe Article 49 of the Lisbon Treaty would kick in, which means we'd have to rejoin as a new member state.
Which would then mean signing up to the euro, etc., wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We'd have to join the other 26 that are all committed to go into it. Currently, Denmark's the other one that isn't in it and can stay out. And not only that, I think we'd lose all our rebates. We'd be required to join the single European army. And by the way, in 2016, the Ombudsman for the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, said the German armed forces are not fit for purpose, and it's been the German Ministry of Defence that's been leading on it. So the last thing I want to do is to go back into the EU. But nobody talks about Article 59. I've written to Cable
49.
3 times about it. Have I had an answer?
No. No, yeah, and I mean, don't hold your breath, Robert. But, Robert, do you agree with me? I mean, this is why, of course, there has been this monumental battle over what's due to happen on the 29th of March next year. Because you know what, Robert? If we leave, which I now believe firmly we're going to, without delays and without a second referendum, that will be, in terms of our history, when kids at school learning about this in a couple of 100 years' time look back, us breaking from the European treaties is a major moment in this nation's history, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's going to be like the 18th of June, 1815.
Which, for those that don't know, is when we had the Battle of Waterloo. And I reported from there on the Nick Farage Show on the bicentenary when I was there I was there on the battlefield, and I met the Napoleon Bonaparte modern-day impersonator who told me off terribly. Why are you trying to break up a united Europe? It's what I was trying to build in the first place. Now, he was joking, of course, but hey, maybe he had a point. Robert, it's going to happen, isn't it?
I think so. But we need people like you to keep the pressure up on people like Blair and Cable and challenge them about, are you sure that this will not mean Article 49 if you get this second exit?
You make a very, very good, sound point, and if things get worse, we will need to challenge them with that.
Yeah. Well, I keep saying Article 50 allows it to be revoked, which I understand we can do up until the 29th of March next year. But I believe that would have to be decided by the ECJ. The ECJ is federalist, and therefore they'd say no. You will have to apply on 49.
No, you're almost certainly right, Robert. I thank you very much indeed. Tom in Basingstoke says, Nigel, we are leaving. We should be gone by now anyway. I rather agree with that. And Blair does have his fans out there still. I say bring back Tony Blair. He was the best Prime Minister we've ever had. Put him back in charge and stop all this madness. All the best, says Craig from Burton. People who don't want a second referendum are just scared because they know they would lose. What other reason would everyone not want to have a vote on the final outcome? We voted on a deal that we knew nothing about. No, we didn't vote on a deal. We voted. The question was very simple. Do you want to leave the European Union? And we said yes. We weren't talking, were we, about future deals. So, Joe, I disagree with you, and I also think there is just now not the demand for a referendum. I think people would be furious, in my view, if they were asked to vote again. I wonder what Trish, who's a first-time caller from Hertfordshire, thinks. Hello, Trish.
Hi, Nigel. I am passionately against the EU. I don't believe there'll be a second referendum. If they force it on us, we will all vote again, no problem. But personally, I think if that happens, that will be the end of the political class as we know it. I do not think MPs realise how angry the public is with politicians from all parties. There's good politicians, in each party, but their behaviour is an absolute disgrace.
Well, maybe, Trish, when we saw the fishermen coming up the Thames last week and dumping over quota haddock, and I did help them with that. But it's the kind of thing that we expect to see the French doing, isn't it? The French go for direct action, and we don't expect, the Brits ever to do this. And I wonder whether that was perhaps a symptom of some of that pent-up anger, Trish, that you're talking about.
Well, it was so emotive. It destroyed friendships. It destroyed, of course, problems within families. And they're talking about making us go through it again when they've got their answer. The abuse that we've taken since the referendum because we won the majority is shocking. The vote was in. We were told it was a once-in-a-lifetime vote.
Yep, absolutely.
And whatever the result,
they'd abide by it.
That is what would be done.
Yes.
And then suddenly, it was just a consultation.
Yeah.
Then it's, everybody lied. At the end of the day, they keep saying we didn't know what we were voting for. Every Leave voter I've ever spoken to knew exactly what we voted for.
But Trish, surely...
I didn't bother doing their research.
Trish, surely...
That's their problem.
Come on, Trish, surely you're very, very stupid, aren't you? You must be. You're a Leave voter. I mean, that's how they speak to us, isn't it?
Well, the problem is also, when we did our research, as what we did, I know lots of people who did a lot of research, we ended up more anti-EU because we couldn't believe what we'd sleepwalked into for 40 years.
Yeah, well, it was always said, wasn't it, that it was rather like, if you put a lobster in a pot of boiling water, you better hold the lid down pretty firmly because it will fight and bash to get out. But if you put a lobster into cold water and turn on the gas and slowly, it heats up and the lobster loses consciousness and the lobster then gets cooked and served on your plate. And basically, they told us back in the 70s we were joining a club that was about being friends and was about free trade and would never affect our essential national sovereignty. And like the lobster in cold water, bit by bit, year after year, we lost yet more of the ability to govern ourselves. Trish, I thank you for your call. And I promise you, folks, there are millions of Trishes out there. In fact, there's actually more anger at the moment on the Leave side than there is on the Remain side. Anger because they can't believe that politicians want to overturn a vote they were told was final. And I think also deep frustration about how long it's taking and the way the deal's being shaped. And listen, I am not happy with the way the deal's being shaped, but I'm actually finally convinced that we will get over the line on March 29th next year, and that will be a great day in our national history. Indeed, a liberation. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's now 7:45. There's not going to be a second referendum. Blair's whistling in the wind. I was really worried 4 or 5 months ago. I really thought that Parliament was going to vote this deal down and force it upon us. But I think Corbyn has now shown Labour MPs that would be a crazy electoral thing for them to do. And I think we're leaving next year, albeit on terms I don't like. That's what I think. What do you think? What does Angela, a first-time caller from Reading, think? Good evening, Angela.
Good evening, Nigel. Well, the one thing I do agree with Tony Blair is the fact that he said a few weeks ago now, people didn't know what they were voting for at the referendum. And he's quite right. I didn't know what I was voting for at the referendum. Back in 1975, I was conned. Yeah. And I've been conned ever since. There was a very good programme on, I don't know what channel, about 2 years ago now, and it was about the history of Europe. And it took you right the way through from just after the war. And then they showed you what had happened and Ted Heath admitting that he was not going to tell the public that it was a political union.
Yes, he admitted this, didn't he? Jeremy Paxman got this out of him on Newsnight. Paxman said to him, but a single currency, a union with an army, I mean, was this intended all along? And he said yes. He just lied to people, didn't he?
He absolutely. He lied, and it wasn't in the manifesto at the time, or the publication.
Yep.
Then there was, then on this programme they had about Mrs Thatcher, and admitting when she signed away a veto, and she turned to her cabinet and said, I think I've made a terrible mistake. There was a bit about John Major, I think, in the Maastricht Treaty, Tony Blair and the Lisbon Treaty, both saying they were going to give us referendums, and then they said, oh no, they weren't going to give us a referendum after all. And actually, it was this programme that finally persuaded me. I've been conned all these years, and I was so angry.
Isn't it funny, Angela? Because they say we lied because Boris had a bus with 350 million a week on it. And even if that figure was the top end of anything that was ever possible, you know, compared to the gigantic lies they've been telling us for 50 years, it was nothing, was it?
No, absolutely not, no. And this was one of the deciding factors, and I thought, well, I've been so angry about the whole, lots of aspects of the European
So you were a convert, Angela, to the Eurosceptic viewpoint during the referendum, then?
Yes, basically, because as I say, I voted to stay back in the 70s,
Yeah.
but slowly over the years, I've just felt that it's just been mishandled, and I just don't agree with the whole aspect of these unelected people making all the rules and us just having to abide by, and trivial little matters. They seem to spend so much time on stupid issues.
EU law permeates virtually every nook and cranny of our life, and that is true. Angela,
yes.
Do you agree with me that the prospects of a second referendum, much as they're wanted by Blair and co, now look a bit remote?
Well, I hope so.
So do I.
I sincerely hope so.
So do I.
Because, as you just said earlier, we were told 2 years ago this was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime deal.
Yep.
And to go back on that, people will lose their trust in politicians completely.
Angela, do you know what? I think it's pretty wafer thin already. Angela, thank you for calling the show. Your first time, do call again. Thank you. I get by tweet, I hope not. It would destroy voting democratically. Results should be respected, says Connie. And several of you tonight, you know, with this theme, that if we were asked to vote again, boy, the anger that would be there at our political class would be huge. Adam is calling from Madrid in Spain, a country that's relatively new to democracy and doesn't seem to want to allow it in Catalonia, Adam.
Good evening again, Nigel.
Hello, yes, you've been on before. So, Adam, you know, you're watching this from a slightly sort of distant place.
I am indeed. The view from Spain is radically different. They don't get Brexit.
No.
Because for them, being members of the European Union means breaking their dictatorial past, being part of what they see as the modern world.
Yes.
And what we don't like about the European Union, that the politicians are unelected and therefore unaccountable. A lot of Spanish tell me that they trust the bureaucrats in Brussels more than their own elected politicians.
Yeah, do you know, Adam, I used to hear that in Italy. Back in the 90s, I spent a lot of time in Italy, and they used to tell me, oh, Nigel, the European Union's fine. They're actually professionals. They can run things. Our lot are useless. And that was a big thing I used to hear in Italy, and in many ways, they perhaps had a point. But isn't it funny how now, you fast forward to today, and Italy is now becoming a very Eurosceptic country?
Indeed. Not happening yet in Spain.
No.
Because Spanish people don't seem to be able to make a distinction between Europe on the one hand and the European Union as a political construct on the other.
And yet, Adam, just quickly, if I can ask you, and yet they're on the verge of perhaps locking up some of the Catalan separatists for up to 30 years.
Yep, indeed. And Europe supports them in this.
It certainly does. Adam, you've watched Tony Blair today. Is he onto a good thing, or is he onto a loser by calling once again for a second referendum?
He's onto a loser, but he's going to get his own way in another way. Our government won't dare have a second referendum, but they will give the Remainers most of what they want by having a very watered-down, more or less cosmetic Brexit, in my view.
I think that's right, Adam, and yet, do you know, I think something else. I think real democratic debate in this country will start once again on the 30th of March 2019 when we wake up and realise we are now sovereign and we can actually do stuff. We can deregulate, we can nationalise the railways, we can do whatever we want. And I think there's going to be a rebirth of real democratic debate, Adam, about policy. And I think you may well find maybe changes in the leadership of major parties. You may find all sorts of things happen once we've left. Adam, I thank you very much indeed for your call and wish you a good weekend. Let's go to Peter, who's calling from Sunningdale. Good evening.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. Yes, nice to speak to you again once. This Tony Blair and Vince Cable and Nick Clegg, they're on about this, that the younger generation are voting to remain, and that's their sort of, what I could call their standard waving. And they seem, with youngsters, I don't want to be unpleasant to them, but the youngsters look at Jeremy Corbyn, maybe they're confusing him. The fact that his initials are JC, I'm wondering whether they think he's Jesus Christ and has come back from
Jeremy,
the Messiah.
how does that song go? Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, certainly he did achieve a sort of incredible level of popularity in a short space of time last year, didn't he?
But he made so many promises that he knew he couldn't back up. I mean,
but he is the key, Peter. He is the key. He is the key to whether the government wins this vote, in a sense, in Parliament at the end of the process of negotiating a deal or not. And I think he signalled, Peter, pretty firmly, over the course of the last week or two, that actually Labour is not going to support a second referendum because they know how angry it would make millions of their own voters.
Yes, and I think you were right on the Politics Show today to highlight that. And I think that we should be, anybody that wants to leave should be campaigning on the basis that the young people have got to be informed of exactly what's going on in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, more and more we see of unemployment out there. If you go to Spain, as you say, Italy, Greece...
Peter, the youth in Europe are rebelling against it. The youth at the moment think it's a good thing. Change is needed. Peter, I thank you. Time for one last quick call. You've got 40 seconds. Roban, who's calling from Derby. Hello.
Hello, Nigel. Just a quick one. It's my first time on the show, but I'll be really quick. As a young professional, I'm 23 years old myself. I was just saying that I disagree with Blair on having another referendum. I'm someone who actually voted to stay in the European Union, but now that we're coming out, we need to stick with our decision. And you're someone who's been saying that we need to come out for a long time. It's just a shame. I wish we could have someone like yourself leading us out, because we need someone who's straight talking, who's willing to get the job done, not someone who just says words to make people happy. For example, I've recently graduated, and Corbyn was talking about last year he got a lot of popularity just by saying that you get rid of all the debt and that kind of stuff.
And now he won't.
That's not feasible. But I whether people like you or not, for me, is not the issue. What I respect about you is you say something and you stick to it. And I feel like that's the type of person we
Roban, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to have to leave it. I know it's your first time on the show. You didn't get long. Do call us again. Thank you. Well, it's the Easter weekend coming up, but I'm going to be back here on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, and I'm going to do a special because it's the 100th birthday of the Royal Air Force on Sunday. I will have here in the studio the official archivist of the RAF, and I'm going to conduct 2 interviews with men, both nearing 100, who flew aeroplanes during the Battle of Britain in 1940. And on Easter Monday, well, we had John Ketley on, the weatherman, 2 weeks ago, who gave us an exclusive. He said it's going to snow over Easter. No, I thought, it's not possible. But tell you what, on Easter Monday, over much of the country, it almost certainly is. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. See you Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Tonight at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.